What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination, where everything you think is real. Today, I'm doing a little bit of a different format with the Survivor series. I have here with me today, Allie Adams, who has an absolutely tremendous story to tell you and to help get the information to you in the most palatable, complete, and direct way. We're actually going to break this story up into 3 parts. Allie is the mother of a little girl named Hazel, and we're going to talk all about her, but the story really goes deep into corruption from the family court and justice system mixed in with abuse from a partner that you're with that leaks down generationally into a child, and that has most likely been generational for many, many years before it ever occurred in Allie's life. So we're going to break down the story to where today we're actually going to talk about Allie's background, her childhood, and how she ended up meeting her ex and Hazel's father. And we're going to go into those stories because I think it's really important that people realize that these events don't just happen all of a sudden. There's a big buildup to the manipulation that goes into this kind of abuse, especially when it involves a child. And I think to get the information across the best, breaking this story up is going to help you listening understand the depth of this story. And it really is a mind-bending story. So without further ado, Allie, thank you so much for being here with me today. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm honored that you'd want to share with me. I know you've mentioned you've had your story out a couple times and it gets taken down for one reason or another. And I wanted to make sure that there's somewhere people can go to hear your story because it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. And I cannot believe that you're in the position that you're in. So I want everybody listening to be on board with taking notes. You're going to learn a lot from Allie in these next 3 episodes with the legal system, with dealing with an abusive partner from a mother's perspective as well. So get your pen and paper, pay attention. And Allie, why don't we start with your childhood and your background? Let's talk about who you are, who you were before all this occurred.
Sure. So I was born in 1987 in Toronto, Canada. My mom was a single mom and she brought me into the world, but we didn't stay in Canada. When I was 10 months old, we moved to England. I grew up there with my mom being a single mom raising me for about 10 years. I absolutely loved the UK. I love everything about England. I can't wait to go back. It was just a really cool place to grow up. It was the time of the Spice Girls. So it was a really interesting time to be in the UK in the 90s as a little girl. Uniforms, the whole deal. I loved it. It was very different from the US.
The UK is really doing a lot right now too on these topics. It's really neat seeing them getting so loud about human trafficking and SRA and family court systems and all of it. So that's really cool that you had an association with that at some point.
Yeah, there's some wonderful mothers and situations that are also publicly known that have come out of the UK. Mothers and fathers that are all fighting for, justice for what happened to their children or their families. But yeah, so it was a great place to grow up. I moved to Minnesota in 1998. My mom had met my stepdad and we moved over here to live with him, but he's British too. So we had my Canadian mother, my British stepfather, and me, and we moved to Minnesota. And we moved to just outside the metro of Minneapolis, still pretty highly populated, but it's a very Midwestern state, cornfields and cows, and yeah, it's a very Midwestern state, country music, the whole thing. So I went to a school. Sorry, she's trying to talk.
Your baby. Allie has the sweetest little baby girl. You might see an appearance if you're watching, but if you hear her crying in the background, she has the most adorable little daughter.
She hears me talking and she's like, I want to join in too. So I went to a high school, pretty big high school. I think my graduating class was about 1,000 people. But throughout high school, I wound up dabbling in like polysubstance abuse. I was drinking, partying, skipping school. I wound up going to treatment a few times throughout my high school career, which inevitably wound up going back to treatment again when I was 20. I haven't drank now in about 12 years. Stayed away from lots of different other substances that I tried throughout my youth. I actually have my talk therapist that I have today is my counselor from when I went to treatment in 2008 and quit drinking. I've stayed going to AA and NA throughout those years. Periodically, I love the program. I've always been a really big supporter of it. When any friends of mine decide they want to like try get sober or try to, make their lives better, they'll come to me and ask me to go to meetings with them or help them get into treatment or whatever they need. Just been a big part of my life. Actually, when I was 19, so before getting sober is when I met my ex. We were at a party where I was 18, 19, my girlfriends were 18, 19, and we were with a bunch of adults like in their late 20s, which is my ex is 10 years older than me, well, 9, almost 10 years. And he showed up to the party and had just gotten out of treatment himself. Actually, he had, I think, 3 months at the time. He'd gone to treatment in California for drinking and heroin and cocaine. But so it was when I met him was when he was sober. And one of the things I admired about him, and then a few years later, I got sober. And then I watched him have 7 years of sobriety over that time frame between like 18 and 25, 26 for me. And it was something that I really admired about him was the fact that he had gotten sober. One of the reasons I know that he'd had issues with drinking and drugs was because of the abuse that him and his sister had gone through as kids. There was multi-generational familial sexual abuse that occurred on his maternal side, stemming from directly, I knew his grandfather. And that was corroborated by his mother when she informed me of the abuse she'd gone through with family members too in her youth. And then her father and her sister had abused her kids. I had heard of what happened from the grandfather's hands from a few different people over that time frame that I knew my ex and he was sober. His sister, women that had dated his sister, women that had dated him and his and knew his mother. His sister had suffered from eating disorders and borderline personality disorder and other mental health issues, pain management, and she'd gone to treatment, but mostly I know was involved in the Emily program for eating disorders. And she actually passed away in 2015, it might've been 2016. And they created a foundation in her name for people with eating disorders and PTSD and trauma survivors, because she actually was more open about the abuse that occurred in their childhood. So I knew that plagued both of them, him and his sister, and him more so it came out in antisocial personality behaviors, drug addiction, criminal behavior, selling weapons, just disobeying the law, just not really having any appreciation for rules. They didn't really apply to him, where his sister more internalized what they went through, and she self-mutilated, self-harmed, controlled her eating. And so it was really, really tough for both of them, what they went through, how it kind of played out in their lives as adults. One of the things that I experienced from knowing my ex through my youth was he wasn't faithful to really any of his girlfriends. He was very like a man's man, but also played women because it was kind of cool back in the 2000s. Like it was more acceptable for men to be like that and to play multiple women and kind of keep them all on chain and go bounce from one to the other while keeping others in the back pocket. And so that's kind of what he was doing with me and a few other women through the 2000s. oddly enough, a lot of us all have the same name. There's an Alicia and Allie and Alicia. Who is Allie? Like, it's a little odd.
Wow.
But we were all around the same age and all had similar kind of youths growing up, dabbled in drugs, maybe got arrested a couple of times, had sought mental health therapy for either like depression or borderline or bipolar, whatever all of us kind of all struggled with. It seemed to be the type of woman that he was looking for and the one that he could cheat on and abuse. I know he got physical with not only me, but a couple other girlfriends I've had. I've been informed of different physical abuses that they went through, psychological, some sexual, just different variations of abuse to women, but all on a very subtle kind of maneuverable level. Not like black eyes and broken ribs, but just like put downs for a long period of time. Yeah. Choking, charging, pushing. She's so cute.
Got a lot to say.
Like, you're talking, I want to talk too. So I'm not sure if he was, I mean, I'll never be able to say for certain, but I feel like he was looking for a type of woman that he could control with certain ways of abuse and was successful at it. And in turn, making it kind of our fault. It was my fault or the other woman's fault. A lot of gaslighting. It was what I realized was going on for those 5 years. We were together in an intimate, exclusive relationship. He was dating another woman prior to dating me. And like he said, he had a hard time being faithful. So he actually had started seeing me before ending that relationship, but I wasn't aware of that at the time. I remember finding out that he was still in that relationship, and I went to the house to kind of make my presence be known. And, but
so
I think
when you got into an exclusive relationship with him, a little bit later on in life, not high school, you had known him since you were a little bit younger, but whenever you guys kind of reconnected, how did he present himself to you? Was he, did he give any signs, or did he really put on a good show with wanting you to see what he wanted you to see versus what actual reality was?
He'd gone back to drinking. I know that. And that was disappointing, but he didn't drink very much. He didn't like to lose his control of himself. I think that, from what I gathered, it kind of scared him for him to be that way. But he played the victim a lot on the fact that the girl he had chosen to date other than me from the last time we'd been together, she cheated on him with a few people. And so he was very playing the victim role in that, that he was broken and hurt, to kind of make an excuse to be with me now at this point, so many years later from when we'd met and started kind of sleeping together when I was in my early 20s. Was he kind of described it as he wanted me to grow up. He'd watched me grow up, and he wanted me to get more myself together, how I was like a wild child, he called me. And he said, I wanted to make sure you would become the woman that I thought you would, and then we would be together. So he said that to me.
And what did he tell you about his family too? Because you didn't find out a lot of that immediately. What was his perception of his family that he told you versus what it actually was?
So I had known about his sister because I'd been told, and I had been told about what happened to him too, but I didn't feel comfortable necessarily asking him about it. I knew it would be very sensitive and just, something that probably wasn't the easiest to discuss for him, being a man like in his 30s, older, and just being such a guy's guy. I didn't think it would be something easy for him to talk about. But he'd made it sound like what happened to his sister was horrific, and his detest for who did what happened to his sister made it seem very unlikely that he would do the same thing because of the way he spoke about it. He had mentioned waking up with his aunt in his bed or in her bed and not remembering what happened, but wouldn't give me much details on that. Besides that, we didn't really talk about it. We had an incident in 2015 when Hazel was born, right after his sister's passing, where he was fighting with me, and I left the room with the baby because that's what I always would try to get away. And he followed me up the stairs and broke down the door and then pulled me back by my hair. And so the police had to come, and CPS got informed, and they came and they did an interview with us. And that was in 2015. So Hazel was under a year old, and he had admitted, that was the first time and the only time that he admitted to authorities that he had been sexually abused as a child, because I was sitting right next to him in the room when the woman asked us the question if I had or if he had, and he admitted to her that he did. But it was just, I knew that there was alcoholism that ran kind of rampant in the family, womanizing, a lot of dishonesty. It was just kind of a toxic environment for them growing up. And it felt, I know for certain that they didn't get the help for the kids that they actually needed for what they went through. It was just brushed under the rug. Presents, they took them shopping, they bought them cars. His father was pretty well off at that time in their like teenagehood. So they were just, Band-Aids were put over wounds that needed to be healed and not covered up. And I know that was what kind of led to a consistent struggle throughout his sister's life. I mean, she had reached a good place by the end of her life, but it was marked by decades of a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, where I think my ex, he acted outwards and portrayed a stronger sense than is internally, a tougher exterior than what's inside.
That makes sense. And how was your relationship with his parents?
Well, his mother doesn't live here, but she's a daily drinker, and we had a hard time with that, considering I don't drink. She'd stay at my house a few times, and I on occasion would pour her alcohol down the drain. I had a very hard time watching somebody drink themselves to death, even though that's her intention, from what they suffered, she suffered from, what happened to her children, how she couldn't protect them, and then how her children suffered from the abuse, and she witnessed it, all just kind of the hardships, a lifetime of hardship. So his mother and I had a really tough time kind of on that level. As much as I tried to, accept her and like love her, I was also trying to help her, survive where she doesn't want to. His father is a lot more reserved and older. He's an older gentleman. There's 3 older sisters, and then my ex and his younger sister from his second wife. So there's 5 kids, but the 3 older sisters, I don't think went through the same, because the abuse happened on his mother's side, the maternal side. So it's only him and his sister that had, were abused by her father or any other family members. But I think primarily just the father and the aunt. Oh, honey. But the father's here. His father is here in Minnesota. So we'd see him a lot more. And I really liked him more than the mother. She seemed to just make excuses for what happened to her children. But you could see she was eating her inside every day anyways. There's no reason to drink vodka all day long unless you really can't face reality.
Absolutely. And that seems to be a common consensus that is pretty consistent with a lot of these stories that I've brought on this show, is there is some type of drug or alcohol abuse in a lot of these families, and so that even though they're choosing to do what they're doing to their kids, to their grandkids, to whoever it is that they're abusing, that they have a deep misery inside that they're not dealing with, and they show it through these really bad addictive behaviors. So I'm not surprised by that, but it definitely shows how there's a lot of generational things that seem to have been passed down in that family, including that trait, characteristic, and attribute that your ex had also. And so whenever you guys had first started dating, I'm sure just like with any new relationship, there's kind of that honeymoon phase and it's really exciting. And I'm sure even for you, I try to put myself in your shoes, and I think it would be meaningful if you were trying to stop an addiction, or if you had dealt with one, to be with somebody who knows what that struggle is like, no matter where they're at on that path. So I also don't think that's a mistake, that may have been an attraction then to you, and something that you said you admired. I feel that I would have done the exact same thing, and you have something right away to bond over. So when did things in your relationship, obviously you ended up having a child with him. How can you explain and touch on the lead up to that, and how he treated you, and the relationship, how that evolved as you got closer to having a child?
Sure. As I'd mentioned, we'd been kind of seeing each other through my 20s, but not officially. So there were a few times that we were just kind of courting, if you will, like dating casually. But it was when I was 26 that we started dating exclusively, and pretty quickly I was pregnant. He hadn't Facebook officialed me or anything along those lines, and I had been seeing him for about almost a year, but I wasn't invited to things or like brought to places, and I don't know if he was like embarrassed to be dating me or anybody, or I'm not quite sure, but it was about almost a year when I said, I want to be acknowledged as your girlfriend, considering we've been together for this long. So that happened, and very quickly I became pregnant, almost within like a month or two frame.
And you weren't trying to get pregnant, right?
I was not trying. I was not trying. I did mention to my mother at the time and my best friend that he was trying. How can I put this gracefully? So for our entire history of dating and being intimate, there was precautions taken to ensure that no baby was ever made. And those precautions just went out the window very quickly, without any discussion or, asking if that was okay or what we were working for. It just happened. And I expressed to my mother and my best friend, I think he's trying to get me pregnant. I feel like that's what he's trying to do. And I was pregnant. I want to say July, the end of June, beginning of July, I found out I was pregnant very quickly. With which we weren't living together at the time yet. He had moved into an apartment near mine though, and that I had roommates. So while I was pregnant, I let my roommates stay with me they had just kind of moved in. I let them almost finish out a full year. But prior to giving birth, I'd had them move out, and so I could make a nursery and had him move in so he could be there for when I gave birth and when she would arrive.
So whenever you were with him during this period of time, looking back, because it's most likely challenging to recognize it while you're in it, do you recognize now any signs of grooming that you were going through that you may not have been aware at the time? And what were those things, if so?
I think from the teenage years, like 18, 19 through 22, 23, 24, a lot of it was the manipulation that he was some kind of prize to be won, since he had all these women sort of fighting for him or competing with each other or getting mad at each other. Or it was, and I don't even know if it was the women, more so him making that kind of the way it appeared. especially, I mean, I know for me with being with me, but then also while being with me saying, well, I'm going to go back to this person now. It was just a very weird, I don't know, behavior. I've never experienced that with anybody else. And I don't know if I've ever seen anybody do that, but it was just kind of like the juggling of all these young women that are all, I mean, if I was to describe me, and at least 2 to 3 of them sort of alpha females, like big characteristics, not quiet people, loud personalities, fun people. Like these women are beautiful and outgoing. And I'm not just talking about myself. Like they are like beautiful, outgoing women. And so
too, by the way.
For me, it's like he liked a particular type of girl, but he couldn't pick between the bunch, or it was, you know, whichever one was working better for him, or whatnot. I do believe the one of the relationship ended, I think, around a specific situation of cheating and physical abuse, where he choked her. I know she said he choked her, but the story I was told was he told me she locked herself in the bathroom, hurt herself, and called the police and said he did it, which her story is he was the abuser. And I, as being a personal experience of my own, know that that is something he does do. I believe her, but that was how he twisted it to the rest, that she, you know, that is what she did. She locked herself in the bathroom and hurt herself and lied to the police. So it was just kind of that manipulation of, if you were the one he chose, you like won something. You were the winner. Like, good for you. Yeah, you know, when it's not truly no prize there at all, but it was just the way it seemed. It seemed like you had the attention of this tough guy, bad boy, motorcycle driving, cigarette smoking, like tough dude. Like that's what we all kind of liked, because of being the type of women we were. It seemed great, but I know he couldn't be faithful to anybody. I know he was abusive to all of us. I know, I think watching, I've read where he was being accused of self-sabotaging these situations. And I don't know if he was or was not. I just think, as good as you can play a good guy and the right, like a good person, you're not going to be able to all the time. And so being as we were the women in his life, which meant we were very close to him and around him the most, of course, we saw him at his true self, which was usually controlling and manipulative and abusive and a liar, and kind of quite scary to some degree. That's there's such a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde sort of situation, where out as other people's kind of looking in, like, oh, such a great person, like got his shit together, like loves his sister, went through hell, but came out the other side. And it's like, yeah, he can only put that on for so long. And then, you know, you can't 100% of the time. So I got to see a lot of him broken, and I know the other women did too. But I think it also in so many ways is kind of for the type of woman that wants to help somebody or help heal them or fix them. He's also that to us, to the women too. We all thought we'd be the one that he'd get better for, or seek help for, or talk to a therapist, you know, like would improve him to be with us. But it's just not that. I don't think was ever his goal, if that makes sense. It was to find somebody broken enough that he could use the skills he knows to control. And so that's why all of us, like I said, have had some kind of history with addiction or mental health, is because there's, you know, some kind of trauma that's happened in everybody's history. I know mine is moving continents to continents, making kind of attachment to loved ones a difficult thing for me. That's like where my trauma stems from. I'm not sure what the other girls are. I just know what mine is and what his is. And his is familial sexual abuse.
Do you think, looking back, that was his goal? I know that it's hard sometimes to have insight to how these families actually operate, because it's not something that they tell us. But do you think, looking back, that that was something he was groomed to do? Was your goal in life is to have a child, and you need to find a woman that will be the perfect fit for that situation, that you can easily manipulate, checks all the boxes that we need to have what you just said, those different characteristics. Do you think that it was intentional all those years that he was eventually building up to say, which one is eventually going to commit to me, that I can not just abuse, but from the parental perspective, get that next generation going with this abuse? Do you think that was something that he was doing on purpose, or do you think that it was just random that you all were entangled in this for so long?
The signs make it seem a lot more like it was on purpose. Whether or not that purpose was conscious or not is what I'm unaware of. You know, I don't know if he knows that's what he was doing, but for sure, it's what it looks like from knowing the history of myself and the other women's with him, and knowing his own history. But from what I know of these situations, is the behavior is just so prevalent through their youth. It's what they are introduced to so young that it is ingrained. You, not that I know he purposely grew up and repeated the habit, but he did grow up and repeat the habit. So I don't know if he's, you know, was looking specifically to have a child to repeat the incest with, but behaviorally it looks like it makes more sense that it was, even if he isn't aware, especially given the fact that attempting to remove me from her life as early as her first year of life, it shows a pattern of consistent trying to get me removed, trying to get me out of the picture. And other specific things, such as wanting to be the one to give her baths, which meant he would be the one in the bathtub with her when she's naked. These are different things that I know people grooming children and have been know the tricks of the trade in grooming your child for sexual abuse are things they do, such as him wanting to name the entire genital area, that's vagina and butt, the tushy, because then when the child says tushy, there's no specifics. It's easier to discredit because they're not saying he touched my vagina. She's saying he touched my tushy. And that could be anything from a pat to a spank. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it blurs the lines, such as the bathing. It blurs the lines. The child is used to the father being with her naked and washing her. So if dad's touching her, it's not necessarily going to be so alarming. So there's many things that I know were going on that I know are specifically things that they do. And like I said, I don't know if he had help in being like, do these things to help you achieve this goal, or it's just in him from his experience from being groomed, being abused as a child. And like I said, I don't know the extent of how frequent the sexual abuse he endured as a child was, but I know the extent of, I know to an extent what happened to his sister and him. And essentially it is enough. It is enough to plant a seed for such an evil activity to continue on in a family. It doesn't need to be daily for 10 years. It can be a few times from one relative, but it's enough to have the perversion plant itself. And so with him wanting her to sleep in our bed through her whole year to year 3.5, he always wanted her to. And I always said no, because I wanted my sleep. I wanted my bed to myself. I didn't want a kid's foot in my face. I struggled with insomnia enough growing up that if I'd get to bed and I'd only get a certain amount, I needed to interrupt it. Like I said, wanting to give her baths, call everything the tushy, her to sleep with us. When it came time to potty training, he was very adamant and persistent about potty training. He wanted her out of a diaper. And I do think that was a part-time frame when things started to change for her. When he started abusing her, he wanted her out of a diaper to be able to do it. So it was a lot of pressure to get her out of her diaper. Just specific things that at the time, and with the space in between all these things, you don't piece them together. Looking back, you're like, oh, it makes sense. It makes so much more sense. And these are big red flags now that I will forever be aware of And even I've heard mothers say like, he's doing this or he's doing that. I'm like, oh no, like I recognize it. I recognize that it's part of a pattern. It's part of blurring lines and crossing boundaries and creating a normalcy to something that's leading up to something that is horrific. But it's not as, for the child, it's not as outside the box, because there's already so much blurring of everything. They don't know. They just don't know.
Now, I want to get in the next episode, I want to get a little more into what you experienced after that, when things started to maybe click in your mind or not feel good about what you were seeing with Hazel. I'd love for you to talk and go a little bit more into your side of it and talk about the abuse that you endured and that buildup, because that's another component to your story that I want people to understand, is that it's very easy as well being that parent figure, especially when you're a new parent. You don't know exactly the perfect way to do everything, not that there is one, but it can be really easy to give into that manipulation and to make excuses for it. And then especially as it gets worse and worse. Can you talk about what some of your own personal experiences of how he started to change around you throughout that relationship?
Sure. Like I said, right before we started dating, he'd gone back to drinking. Not that he'd go into big drinking benders or binges, but I do know it would kind of less inhibit his emotions and his behaviors. I had gone through DBT therapy throughout my teenage years and early 20s, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, to kind of learn coping skills for different higher emotions that I go through. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder when I was 18. There's criterion that you have to fit to be diagnosed, and because it is a personality disorder stemming from trauma, you can quite kind of heal from it and move on past the criterion and not really display those behaviors anymore. So 18 and now I'm 33. I don't hold many of those criterion. And one of the ones I had really come far from was self-mutilating. I had stopped doing that. One of the things that started up again in my relationship with my ex was self-mutilating. He had a tendency to make you feel very stupid. That was kind of his, the cruelest thing he did was want to make you feel very stupid. Just condescending, talking down to a lot of debating. He really enjoyed debating politics, religion, God, science, things along those lines. And if you didn't want to participate in these debates, he made it out that you were just too stupid to participate. Like, if you didn't have an argument to debate, then you just don't know what you're talking about. And so there was a lot of that going on. There was a lot of, they'd be like multi-hour long gaslighting fights, 1 hour to 4 hours. And they would all hours of the day. My mother was somebody I would call quite a lot throughout these, because I felt like I needed somebody with me, or I needed a witness. I wasn't quite sure, but I knew, and she was willing, she would answer almost every time. And these fights happen multiple times a week. Sometimes we'd go a few weeks without, and we call it a really like good period of time, really, when there's no fighting, but that didn't last very long. Generally these fights would happen around holidays, like Christmas, birthdays, New Year's, like any special occasion was kind of usually ruined or marked by some kind of nonsensical fight. And he wouldn't let you, he wouldn't let it go. That's why I'd have to call her, because I need somebody to be with me, calm me down, maybe call him and get him to go away and talk to him and get him to calm down, which she did a lot. She would speak to him. He'd leave the house, as he always did when he was on the phone. He'd leave the house, never spoke on the phone in front of me. Even my neighbor today says, oh yeah, I used to remember he'd always be walking up and down the sidewalk on the phone. I know, because he wouldn't talk on the phone near me. So he'd leave, talk to my mom, kind of give his own side of the story, which was never accurate. But if it was necessary, which had happened a lot, I called the police. I called the police when living in Minneapolis. I called them when living in Chanhassen. I called them when living out here in Farmington. it was part of our trial, was kind of the amount of times I called the police was brought up. And it was usually I would be asking for help to make him stop, because he seemed to have this goal of wanting me to snap, like wanting me to lose my mind. Just not I couldn't take it. I couldn't take the jabbing or the berating or the insinuating that I'm not in, like I'm just less than a person. So I'd call the police, they'd come. Sometimes there would have been something physical that happened, such as him choking me. Like one example, I was 7 months pregnant. He wrapped his arm around my neck in a chokehold and whispered in my ear, "Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep." He was trying to choke me out, but I was very pregnant, so I kind of had that like fight for your life instinct, and I was able to get him off me. But so the police would come, and then they'd ask me, "Are you okay?" Sometimes they would do the, like, if you need us to help you and you can't say it right now, wink at us, things like that. And generally, to keep him out of jail, I would protect him on that level, and I wouldn't talk about him physically harming me, which I know now today was probably one of the biggest mistakes I ever did, because I should never have done that. Restriction of breath is, like, I think it is a felonious charge here in Minnesota, and he'd have a couple of those. But I know he would also call the police before they'd come to give his side of the story, because I've seen it in many police reports. He would call and say, "She has borderline personality disorder. She's crazy. She is, don't believe what she's saying. She's just out of her mind." Like, he did that a lot. He'd film me. He'd bring out his phone and he'd film me, and he'd say, "I'm going to use this footage to prove that you're crazy, or take Hazel from you so you'll never see her again." He'd say that to me multiple times. I have some audios of that, actually. And as well as my mother was well aware, because he would tell her, he'd say, "I'm going to take this and use it against her." So it was just, that was happening all the time. And believing it was my fault all the time, I was in therapy constantly throughout our relationship. I did multiple bouts of DBT training at many different facilities, because the courses itself are usually 6 to 16 weeks. It's many, or even a year long. So you do the course, and you have group therapy and individual therapy. So I did that. I was doing that all the whole time throughout our relationship, trying to make myself better, to make the relationship better. I got us into couples counseling. We'd go to that, and either he'd say that the therapist wasn't smart enough, or he didn't like them, or he just wasn't proactive with, let's get another date on the calendar so we can get back there. And it would just never happen. He didn't want to do any of that. I know the first time that CPS came and he admitted to being sexually abused as a child because of him pulling my hair, that whole incident, that sparked him being requested to take domestic abuse courses, which he didn't do. And they had me and Hazel move home with my parents out of my house for about 3 months. We went and lived with my parents again. And I believe it's written in the CPS like recommendations that he wasn't to be alone with Hazel either. But I know he just refused. There was nothing wrong with him in his opinion. He didn't need help. So asking him to do therapy or go to therapy or improve was just not something he was willing to do, because there was nothing wrong with him. It was all everybody. It was my fault. It was all my fault. Why we were fighting all the time, or why things got physical. Or another time that he choked me, was on the bed. He choked me down on the bed, like, so I was laying flat, and I just reached for anything I could grab. And there was a glass of water on my bedside table, and I hit him in the face with it to get him off of me. Which I remember his coworkers, because I was pregnant during that time also, they were making fun of the fact that pregnant ladies have strong right hooks or something because of him having a black eye. But it was, I just needed to get him off of me. I didn't know how far he'd go with that. You know, I didn't know how
100%. Well,
if he'd stop.
that's the important thing. I want people listening. Some of this, I know even from my own experiences, I look back on a lot of my relationships and I'm like, why did I stay that long? It's so clear now that they were not the person for me. They weren't treating me good. But this is the part that we don't understand as a society because it's something that's not talked about. It's something that even therapists aren't trained to talk about a lot. And it's that mind control, that abuse over time to basically degrade you to feel like you're absolutely nothing, to brainwash you into thinking everything's your fault. And so when something bad does happen, it's almost like going back to being a child where, you know, a parent tells you or something happens with a parent and all of a sudden you feel like everything's your fault, right? And you have that mindset. This manipulation is so deep, it's so ingrained to be a slow process of literally breaking you down to build you up to what they want you to be versus what you are. And I want people to think about that. We've all been in relationships that we can look back now, even friendships, and say, why did I stay so long? I felt so much better whenever I left. But in those moments, you thought that that was the right thing to do, no matter what the either abuse or talking down or fighting, whatever it was that you were experiencing at the time, it feels normal in that moment. And it's our inherent nature to protect people that we love, you know. And I'm sure that that in your heart you felt that, well, he loves me, so I'm going to work with him on this. Love can overcome everything. He can work on it. All this stuff, it can be worked through and it'll be okay, you know. Or we find ways to give excuses to these things, even though we know looking back that there was really nothing that we could change a lot of times. In certain cases, yes, if you do have a partner that's willing to go to therapy and work through things. But at the time, it's really easy to get sucked into that because you're so broken. You're depleted down to feel like it literally is your fault. So your tolerance for things gets way higher because instead of blaming the other person, you're being conditioned over time to blame yourself to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I remembered a few things while you were talking. It was the control is so subtle. Like,
yes,
telling me that his ex, when she cut her hair short, made him unattracted to her was a very indirect way of saying don't cut your hair. Saying that women who dye their hair colors have no sense of self and don't know who they are and are slutty, and yeah, it makes you not want to do that. It's just constant things like that over time, a lot of judgments. He would say one particular political party had big hearts and little brains, and like do the hand gestures, just like these kind of, but like I said, it was berating. Like there'd be hours of this going on to me on a really regular basis. And because we had a daughter together that I thought needed both of us and needed both of us to try work through it, that is why I stayed. That is what I thought was the best decision, being, as I said, I grew up by myself with my mom. I didn't want that for Hazel. I wanted her to have both parents. And I mean, like I said, I tried to do everything within my power to help me and myself be healthier on my end, or just even cope on my end. That's all I was doing, which is why when she was 3.5, at a point in time when she was able to say to me, she was able to start repeating kind of that she recognized what was going on wasn't right. She called our house a naughty house. She said, that's a naughty house. She had said to me, when my ex and my mother were fighting, I brought her outside to get away and said, I'm so sorry, grandma and dad are fighting. And she said to me, it's okay, accidents happen, then you say you're sorry. I realized she was reaching this level of understanding and knowledge where now the dysfunction between him and I didn't want it impacting her, where she thought that's normal or that's what love is, which is why August of 2018, it was time. There was no more, she's too young, she won't remember. Now she's old enough, she's going to remember. And this is going to form her as a person, as a woman. And the last thing I wanted was my daughter being abused in any way, shape, or form, psychologically, physically, any way, and think that that's normal because she saw me accept it for myself.
Absolutely. And that's a really hard judgment to make because, like you said, you're trying to do the right thing, thinking in your mind, what do I need to do to be better for this family? Maybe if I learn how to communicate better, maybe if I adhere to some of his preferences, he'll like me better. Maybe if I do this, right? They put it in your brain that there's all these things you need to work on and that if you do, it'll be okay. You know, and I think that that's so important because a lot of people don't understand that. They can read a testimony and say, why would somebody stay when this and this happened? You don't realize how subtle the abuse is and that it's meant to break down your psyche. It's meant to break you down emotionally, mentally, physically, in all different ways. It's made to break you down as a person so you can be manipulated into whatever coercion it is that they want from you. It's their own twisted version of, and it's really sick, honestly, that people devote that much time with a strategy knowing where they want to go, right? And we might not know exactly his end goal, or if he was working on this to get you in a relationship for that long. We might not know his full intentions over the whole course of time that you've known him. But clearly, once you guys did establish that exclusivity, he had a goal that he was beelining to, and he significantly changed himself over that time as you started to tolerate more and more from all the brainwashing that he was doing.
Yeah, he wasn't the same person by the time Hazel was 3.5 than he was when we were dating casually. He was not, and the abuse wasn't the same. It had gotten just more obvious. He didn't fear losing me. I don't think he feared the change, because when I did end the relationship, finally, all of a sudden he was willing to get married. He was willing to have another baby. He was willing to go to therapy. He was willing to do all the things. And I remember that being thrown in my face kind of at the end, like, she's not the one willing to go to therapy. She's not the one that willing. And it's because I had denied his offer to do it. Finally, again, after so many years of me trying, I wasn't willing to, too little, too late kind of mentality. Like, no, it was my opinion and decision at the time was like, the damage has been done and been going on for so long that there has to be drastic changes to probably ensure him drastically change. I don't know if it would have. I do know that very quickly, Hazel was being treated sort of as a pawn within the situation. I obviously, when we broke up, wanted 50-50 parenting without even the courts being involved. It wasn't necessary in my mind. I thought, you're her dad, I'm her mom, you love her, I love her. Let's just split it down the middle and we'll figure out holidays and stuff as we go. But we have the capability to be adults about it. That was what I was hoping, was trying to do with the breakup, was all of a sudden be very mature about the decisions we made when it came to, what would be best for her. When I knew being in the same roof, me and him, that wouldn't have been best for either him or I, kind of considering how far the abuse had gone and how, without it seeming to be getting any better at all. Like, it wasn't changing. There was no improvement. Like I said, it was getting more blatant, more obvious. He'd kind of turned his his abuse on my mother at that point, and she was going through it. She was here in the house, and he was yelling at her, being mean to her, making her feel very small and insignificant and like she was stupid and crazy, making her, he was starting to affect her. And at that point, that's when I kind of had enough. Like, you pick on me all you want, but you go pick on my mother, then we've got a different argument. And like I've said, at this point in time, I didn't know what was going on with Hazel. Things had been happening. There's documented things that were going on that led to the high probability that the sexual abuse had begun. Medical stuff, comments, behavioral issues. But I knew that for my sake, the abuse I was going through was too much for any family to go through, or at least I didn't want to go through it, and I didn't want my daughter to witness it. But it was getting me out of there, which I believe was the catalyst to finding out what was going on with my kid, because him not being here, I think, gave her a sense of security and safety within the home because he wasn't here anymore. But that was essentially how I asked him to move out, why, and what I had been going through and what I was afraid of her having to either go through or witness, even just a man treating a woman that way, being as she's a girl. And I didn't want her thinking that's okay, because it's not okay. It's not okay to try very hard to make a woman cry with the intent that you're going to break her emotionally and break her psyche so that she's just quiet, unopinionated, flexible, a mold, if you will. He wanted a mold, I think, for a partner, not a partner.
Looking back, what are some, you mentioned a few, but for parents listening, for people in a couple who may be relating to your story and saying, gosh, could I be going through something like this? I thought this was kind of normal, but maybe it's not. What red flags would you give or say are things to pay attention to for people that may be in a situation that you are right now, where they're not really aware or they don't know? Maybe they're thinking, maybe this isn't healthy. What are some red flags that you can share looking back that you would recommend other people look for in their own relationships?
So certainly when it came to his relationship with Hazel, he was very tactile with it, being very almost like romantic, if you will. I remember having to say a few times when he'd come home from work, could you please say hi to me first, instead of run to the baby and then roll around on the ground, kissing her and whispering in her ear. And like, these were really normal day-to-day things for us. And I'm not saying they're bad, but it was every day over time. It was just very, almost like favoritism, if you will. Like he favored our daughter more than me, but almost like wanted her to know it, or wanted me to know it too. And I don't know if that's part of the psychological like abuse, like you're not as good as our kid, even probably. But then that, you know, that was turned into a request to give her baths. So there was getting in the bathtub with her from baby all the way till 3. I mean, she'd started to be able to take baths on her own, but he also would join her, requesting she sleep in the bed, requesting to get her out of the diaper into potty training at the age of, I think it started at 2.5. He wanted her potty trained. I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with daddy-daughter dates, but there became I think it was Saturday mornings from a pretty young age. They would go out every morning with each other. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I know that they would come to the Mall of America and walk around and do things there. And it is a fun place for kids, but I also know the Mall of America is one of the highest trafficking locations in the US. And like, I only know that now, having eventually looked into it. There's multiple hotels that are attached to the mall as well as all around it. And so I know that even with exploitation or trafficking, it's a high location for that. What else? I didn't like how, I don't know if this is just bad parenting either, but like he'd get kind of aggressive with her, but not in the same way as with me. Like pick her up very, very quickly, or put her in her crib very, very quickly, almost like angrily, shut her in the bathroom and close the door with the lights out. Things like that. Just those are all just like abusive things. They're all just things that showed poor temper control, or just self-control, really. You shouldn't have to like reach that level of aggression to get your message across or assert your own authority. But that seemed to be one of the ways he handled things. Like I said, calling the entire genital area the tushy, making sure that there's no separation in the mind between vagina and butt, just all the tushy. I know I've read that ever since. They write that in books to label the locations anatomically correct, specifically for this purpose. I know that he'd say some things in front of her about me, almost like, don't do this like your mother, that type of thing that had started to happen. I know that was happening living in this Minneapolis. So towards the end, about the time when she was about 2. So she was starting to, she'd understand what he was saying. Like, don't behave like that, like your mother, putting me down. I mean, he did it in front of me, let alone with when I wasn't in the room. He'd started to say to her that my friends were bad. And I know that because she told me. So like some of my girlfriends and my mom, even, he'd say they are bad. Whether I knew he elaborated on it, she told me that he said so-and-so is bad. So this way he was isolating her from my friends, even like people that cared about and supported me, and which he never wanted to become friends with it anyways either. He'd always say that my friends weren't good enough for him, whatever that meant either. Again, I'm 10 years younger. My friends were generally not quite in the same place as a late 30s, almost 40-year-old man's life, but more in their, their 20s. So we were all in different, kind of different areas of life. But he'd always say my friends weren't good enough for him, and he'd make them feel pretty uncomfortable. A couple of my roommates had asked he not be allowed at the house at one point. Some of them moved out because of him. He had this thing where if my friends would park where he parked by our house, he'd come and ask them to move. Like, he'd be mad about it. Like, just definitely creating kind of an isolation from me and my life, my family, my friends, and him and her, if that makes sense. The only reason I know she felt so comfortable talking to me about what she did was because of how much she trusts me and loves me and knows that I want what's best for her. She knows not to lie to like her mom. Like, she knew that. And I remember the first time I had caught her lying, and I don't know how early that's understood or learned by children, but she had hid a cheese stick behind the couch. And when I asked her if she ate it, she said yes. And then I found it and I was like, you didn't eat it, you hid it. So I knew she was capable of such a concept of, hiding things like that. But she let me know in other ways about what was going on without straight up telling me until, like I said, he moved out, and then he was not here. And I think she felt a lot safer because of that. I think she felt there wouldn't be at least an immediate repercussion, which unfortunately is what kept continuing to happen over the last 3 years, ever since alleging, was every time she would speak up, some kind of punishment, I'm sure, wound up happening to her. In the end, being the greatest one, she completely lost me. She doesn't have access to me at all, because she continued to speak up about what was going on with her, which I know she was told, if you tell, like, she was told I'd be hurt, he'd hurt me. She was told, she once said to me, she asked me if I was going to cut off his finger. And I'd had a couple girlfriends in the house with me the day that she did this. And she said, she was crying. And she said, you're not going to cut off his finger, are you? And I had never, ever said anything like that. I'd never once mentioned chopping off appendages, but she was afraid I was going to cut off his finger. which makes me believe he probably said to her that I was going to do something like that, because I don't know where she would have had such kind of an elaborate sort of thought. She was only 3. I don't think they have any real knowledge of losing fingers or arms or legs or toes. I don't, but it just kind of gave me insight into what her fears are and what she was afraid of. Was that he was going to hurt me, that I was going to cut off parts of his body. Like, she's only 3, she wouldn't want anybody to be hurt at all in any way, shape, or form, to the far extent of her not speaking up, just simply to protect everybody, because she's a child. She doesn't want anybody to be hurt.
100%. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because we all get wrapped up in that to some degree, even if it's not some horrific abuse. Like I said, all of us have been in some type of a relationship that we're not in anymore, that doesn't make sense to us anymore. And I think recognizing that and talking about it more and making it more of a conversation. I know for me, if I would have had more access to learning from people like you, what to look for, what not to, it could have helped my own breaking points and manipulations that I went through in that relationship, or just the mind control that I was under, to help me recognize that, oh wait, when this happens, this isn't normal, right? Like, this isn't something that I should overlook. Maybe I should pay more attention. So I think what you're doing is so inspirational in that way, not only because you're fighting to get your daughter back, but you're fighting for every other kid. Your case is so important. And next week, for everybody listening, we're going to get into actually the situation that led up to and is now the situation that Allie is still in, where she does not have access to Hazel and vice versa. And we're going to talk about how that all happened and why. And it's a really mind-bending story. And I thought it was really important to preface it with this information, because you really have to start digging into that psychology of being the survivor on the one being abused, and then also trying, even if it's not something you can ever comprehend, trying to understand why abusers do the things that they do, why they believe that that is the right thing to do, getting in their head. That is so important in helping prevent these situations from happening to more people, more women, more mothers, more fathers, more children in the future. So I'm really grateful that you shared all that, because like I said, if I would have been able to have those conversations and learn from parents like you and people who had gone through trials and tribulations that were really abusive in a relationship, and if it would have been more common to talk about it, more ways I could have learned, I might have saved myself a lot of harm, and I think that can be said for everybody. This is really something that we're all in relationships all the time, friendships, family, intimate, marriage, children. It's really important that we talk about the hard parts of a relationship and how to manage challenging situations versus just shutting off from people and letting that guilt consume you to the point where you do feel like if you speak out, there's going to be a really dire consequence, because really the worst consequences happen when we're silent. And that's something we don't know until it's too late most of the time. So I'm really grateful for you. And before we get off today, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you would like to share before all the incidents with Hazel started happening?
I think I just want to make sure it's understood that the dynamic of our family, the time that Hazel outcried and everything that I'm kind of publicly battling started, there was so much, now looking back, obvious signs that things were wrong to a degree that is unacceptable and would probably wind up being very detrimental for anybody in the family, him, me, or our daughter. And that it didn't matter that I was constantly trying to make these things better, because that is all you really can do, is that just there was so many opportunity for possibly changing the course of what happened, getting out, getting away. But I do know that I have had to contextualize that if maybe I had ended the relationship earlier and she'd been younger, I wouldn't have ever known what was going to happen to her, and vice versa with later. I do believe that it happened when it did for a reason, being she was young enough to tell the truth, but also too young to be able to really be able to manipulate. Like, she didn't fully know how to lie yet completely. She was still too young to be able to. So I think it happened for us in our family at the time that it was best to happen. But I do know, looking back now, there's a lot of times when I really wish I would have made a different call or a different decision, for us to avoid any of this happening. At the same time, I also think on the other side of that coin that this was going to happen in somebody's life involved with him at some point, someone. And I understand why it's fallen on my shoulders. And so, as heavy as this is to carry, I will carry it, and take care of my daughter and make sure that she comes home, and that, you know, the correct consequences happen to the people that they need to happen to, for the protection of not only my own daughter, but as many other children as possible.
You're so brave. It's so inspiring to me seeing mothers like you and Samantha Baldwin and Lizzie. It takes so much courage, and we'll talk about it on the next episode, but victims from the parenting side of this system that traffics children to abusers, there's a lot of restrictions put on the innocent parent that we'll talk about next time, but it makes it very, very hard to even muster up that courage, especially after a lot of mothers are fresh out of, or parents, I should say, it's not just mothers, but these parents are fresh out of this abusive relationship that they're finally wanting to get away from. And then topping that off, they're going through abuse through the court system. So there's so many different components to this that I also want people to understand how much courage it takes for you to do this, that it's not easy to rehash these stories over and over again. And I'm sure it's not ever something that you wanted to be known for, but I just want you to know from the bottom of my heart, and I know everybody listening can agree with me, thank you for speaking up and for bringing attention to this, because I hope and pray that your story, Lizzie's story, Samantha Baldwin, and so many other mothers and parents stepping forward encourages other parents to join together and do the same if they're going through the same thing. And then also parents to help recognize maybe those signs and to think a little bit different and to have that awareness that this can happen to anybody. So important to have all that awareness, whether you're in a relationship, whether you're a parent going through the same thing, or if you're a child recovering, knowing that there's people out there speaking on behalf of you whenever you are going through it, and then other children. So just thank you so much for what you're doing, Allie. You're a bright shining star. You're absolutely amazing. You're an absolute badass. And I know that you're doing God's work and you're going to get Hazel back. So before we get off today, where can people connect with you?
I have my Instagram, which is justice.for.hazel. There's also Facebook page, Justice for Hazel, and group, Justice for Hazel. There's a petition on change.org called Justice for 5-year-old Hazel that can be signed. Generally, those are where you can find information or see what can be done. We're not really in much of a place right now where too much beside being very patient with the Minnesota Court of Appeals is happening. Obviously praying for the best outcome of that possible so that there can be an ending to this battle and not, it just doesn't keep going on for 3 more years. But that's where you can find information or connect with me if needs be.
And for everybody listening, I'm going to post all of her information in the show notes below. So please connect. I know I say this on all of these interviews with survivors or on this topic, but that's really an important step that we can take from the outside looking in, is teaming up behind them, beside them, in front of them, and around them, and supporting them, sharing their stories, getting this information out. We may not be able to go back in time and prevent all of this from happening, but stories like this give the opportunity in the future for no child to ever have to go through this again. So I'm going to link all of your stuff below, Allie. And for everybody listening, please, please, please connect with her. She has an amazing social media presence, a huge following already, especially for all the censorship that goes on with this topic. So jump in and support her, share her stuff, get involved, find the petition, which will also be below, sign it, share it with people, especially after listening to this and understanding the topic that we're talking about and how important it is that we all put our feet in the water, dive in and start supporting this, because we don't have support from the people who should be supporting it, such as the court systems. This has to come from the people, has to come from the survivors teaming up. It has to come from us. So Allie, thank you so much for coming on today. And for those of you guys listening, we're going to have 2 more episodes focusing on the next chapter of the story, which goes through the entire litigation and court process. And then also the final part will be the past 3 years since she has had access to Hazel. So Allie, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I can't wait to dive a little bit more into this so people can really get the full context of your story and be able to hopefully make a little bit more of a difference than we're able to being completely censored. So thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
For everybody listening, tune in next time. And thank you guys so much. Hit subscribe, share, and we will see you guys next week.